like a buttercup. You're a Barbie doll. Show them all what I'm made of. Strut down the hall. Won't stop till I get enough.
Hey everyone, ready for another deep dive. This one is, well, it's a story that's been making headlines, and it's honestly kind of wild.
Yeah, this one is pretty intense.
We're talking about rapper Jay-Z.
Huge name, obviously.
On a legal situation that's, well, it's a lot more than just your average celebrity lawsuit, you know?
Absolutely, and it brings up some really big questions about justice and how public figures deal with these super sensitive situations.
Right, and like how do they navigate that whole court of public opinion thing too?
Yeah, huge factor these days.
So let's break it down what exactly is going on here.
Okay.
So the lawsuit claims that Jay-Z raped a 13-year-old girl.
And that's a claim that he absolutely denies.
Right, and I just want to be clear that that accusation alone is incredibly serious.
Oh yeah, without a doubt.
Now, there's been a new development. Jay-Z was granted permission to file something called a motion to dismiss.
Right.
And I think some people might be wondering, like, what does that even mean?
Well, think of a motion to dismiss as a legal strategy, kind of like a preemptive strike. Basically, Jay-Z's lawyers are asking the court to throw out the lawsuit before it even goes to trial.
I see.
And their argument is that the lawsuit just doesn't have enough legal ground to stand on.
So it's like they're saying, hold on, this whole case shouldn't even be happening.
Exactly.
And is that the whole legal game plan here?
Actually, it's just one part of it. His lawyers are taking a two-pronged approach.
Okay, what's the other prong?
So in addition to trying to get the whole lawsuit dismissed, they're also pushing for the plaintiff, you know, the person making the accusation, to reveal their identity.
I can see where they're going with that.
They're arguing it's unfair for someone to make such a serious claim while staying anonymous.
Yeah, I mean, how do you defend yourself against an accusation when you don't even know who's making it?
Exactly. And it gets tricky because sometimes courts do allow anonymity, especially in cases like this, you know, sensitive cases.
Right.
It's meant to protect them from backlash or further trauma.
Makes sense.
But this case really highlights how tough it can be to balance that protection with the accused person's right to know who they're up against.
So did the judge side with Jay-Z's lawyers on the anonymity issue?
It's not that simple. The judge ruled that the plaintiff can remain anonymous for now.
Oh, okay.
But acknowledged that they might have to reveal their identity later on if the case keeps going.
So the judge is walking a tightrope here.
Yeah, trying to be really careful.
It makes you wonder how often this comes up, this whole anonymity thing.
You know, it's not all that uncommon, especially in cases with high-profile people.
Really?
Yeah, actually, there was a pretty famous case a few years back.
Oh, tell me about it.
This prominent politician was accused of sexual misconduct by several women.
Okay.
And they initially chose to stay anonymous.
I can see why.
Same reasons we're talking about now: fear of retaliation, worry about their reputations, the whole 9 yards.
It takes a lot of courage to speak out against someone powerful, let alone do it publicly.
Absolutely. So anyway, this politician's case caused a huge debate all over the country about the use of anonymity in these types of lawsuits.
I bet.
Some people were saying it just led to more false accusations, while others were saying it was crucial for encouraging survivors to come forward.
I can definitely see both sides.
It's really tough. So in the end, the accusers in that case did have to reveal their identities.
Wow. And did that change things?
Big time. The media went into overdrive and public opinion became super divided.
That makes sense.
It just shows how complex these situations are and how this whole anonymity thing can really change the entire story.
Okay, so we've got this legal battle going on with all its complexities. But then you also have Jay-Z himself stepping into the spotlight. He's not just letting his lawyers handle everything behind the scenes. He actually made a public statement about all of this.
He did, and it's a very calculated move, I think.
What do you think he's hoping to accomplish by speaking out publicly?
Well, on the surface, it seems like he's questioning the accuser's motives.
Right.
Almost like he's saying, if this really happened, why not go to the police?
Yeah, I remember that part of his statement. It was pretty bold.
But it's also a way for him to use his platform to influence how the public sees this whole thing. You know, to frame the narrative in a way that benefits him.
It's like he's trying to take control of the story before it takes control of him.
Exactly. And this is where things get even more interesting, because this isn't just happening in a courtroom. You have to think about the court of public opinion, the influence of celebrity, and how all of that can actually impact the legal process itself.
So it's not just about the facts of the case, it's about how people perceive those facts.
Exactly.
And how those facts are presented.
You got it. And that brings us to another interesting layer of this story. Jay-Z is claiming that there was an attempt to settle this whole thing before the lawsuit was refiled.
A settlement. So like trying to make it all go away quietly.
Basically, a settlement is an agreement between the people involved to resolve the dispute outside of court.
Interesting. So what does Jay-Z's claim about a settlement tell us about his strategy here?
It's another way to shape the narrative. By bringing up the settlement, he's implying that the lawsuit might be motivated by money rather than a genuine desire for justice.
Ah, so he's trying to cast doubt on the accuser's intentions?
That's one way to interpret it. But of course, we have to consider the other side of the story, too. The plaintiff's lawyer denies those claims.
They do?
Yeah, saying they never demanded any money from Jay-Z and were only seeking a confidential mediation.
Wait, so is that different from a settlement?
Yeah, mediation is a process where a neutral third party helps everyone involved try to find a solution they can all agree on.
Ah, okay. So it sounds like we've got two very different versions of what happened with this supposed settlement or mediation.
Yeah, and that just adds another layer of complexity to an already complex story.
And here's where it gets even wilder. This lawsuit is actually connected to other lawsuits surrounding Sean Diddy Combs, who's named as a co-defendant in this case.
Right.
For those of us who might not be totally up on the music scene, remind us who Diddy is.
Sure. Diddy, also known as Puff Daddy or P. Diddy, he's had a few names over the years.
Okay.
But he's a huge figure in the music industry. Rapper, producer, entrepreneur, you name it.
Wow, so they're both big players in the music world.
Yeah.
And you said Diddy is named as a co-defendant. Does that mean he's being accused of the same thing as Jay-Z?
Not exactly.
Yeah.
While Diddy is named in this particular lawsuit, he's actually facing separate charges.
Oh, wow.
Even more serious charges, actually. There's a whole other legal battle. But the fact that both of these high-profile guys are wrapped up in these connected lawsuits, it definitely adds fuel to the fire.
It's like this whole situation is a tangled web, and the more we learn, the more complicated it gets.
Yeah, you could say that again.
But before we go too far down that rabbit hole, let's take a step back and consider what this all means for you, the listener.
Yeah, good point. Let's bring this back to why it matters.
Exactly. Why should people care about this? So we've got this whole legal drama playing out, but what I think is really interesting is how this story touches on some really fundamental questions about justice and accountability and, the influence of power.
Yeah, you really hit the nail on the head there. This case forces us to deal with some tough questions. Like, how do we protect people who come forward with accusations while still making sure it's fair to the person being accused?
Right. And that whole anonymity thing we were talking about, that's a perfect example of that balance. On the one hand, anonymity can be so important for empowering people to speak out, especially when they're going up against someone super powerful and influential.
Totally. If you're accusing someone like Jay-Z, who has this massive following and top lawyers, it's totally understandable to feel intimidated,
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Anonymity can give them some protection so they can tell their story without being afraid of immediate backlash or public scrutiny.
I get that. But on the other hand, doesn't the accused person also have a right to know who's accusing them? Like, how can they defend themselves if they don't even know who's making the claims?
That's the flip side. And it's a valid point, too. Everyone has the right to face their accuser, challenge the evidence, and tell their side of the story. It's a basic principle of due process.
Right.
And anonymity can make that process a lot harder for the accused person.
So it's like a catch-22. Protect the accuser and maybe compromise the fairness of the legal process, or prioritize the accused person's rights and risk discouraging others from coming forward.
It really is.
Yeah.
There's no easy answer, no perfect solution that makes everyone happy. Each case is different, and you have to consider the specifics and what might happen if you grant or deny anonymity.
It's definitely not as black and white as some people try to make it seem. And speaking of things not being so simple, we also have to factor in public perception. Jay-Z is not just waiting around for the legal process. He's actively trying to shape the narrative through public statements, using his platform to influence how people see the situation.
Yeah, that's key. These days, information spreads so fast, and social media can make or break reputations. Controlling the narrative is almost as important as the legal strategy itself. And someone like Jay-Z, with all his followers and cultural influence, he's got a powerful voice.
For sure. His statement about why this isn't a criminal complaint if the allegations are true, that was a pretty calculated move.
Totally. On the surface, it sounds like a simple question, but it's actually a really smart way to make people doubt the accuser. Plant those seeds of doubt.
Like, maybe they aren't being completely honest. Or maybe their motives aren't so pure.
Exactly. It subtly shifts the focus away from the accusations themselves and puts it on the accuser's credibility. That's the power of PR, especially when you have the resources to get your message out there.
Makes you wonder how much weight we should give to these public statements from powerful people who are in the middle of legal battles. Is it really fair for them to use their influence to potentially sway public opinion before the case even goes to court?
It's a question that legal experts and ethicists have been debating for a long time. On the one hand, everyone has the right to defend themselves publicly, especially when they believe they're being falsely accused.
Free speech and all that.
Right. But then you have to think about the power dynamics. Someone like Jay-Z has a way bigger platform than the average person, and their words carry a lot more weight. They could potentially influence witnesses or even jurors or judges.
It's not exactly a level playing field when it comes to shaping public opinion.
That's one way to put it. It does raise some ethical questions about whether it's appropriate for these high-profile figures to use their platform in a way that could prejudice a case before it's even been heard in court.
Okay, so we've got the anonymity issue, the power of public statements, and then there's that whole thing about the alleged settlement attempt. It seems like every time we peel back a layer, there's even more complexity.
It's like a legal onion. With each layer, you get a whole new set of questions.
Right. And the settlement attempt is just another wrinkle in the story. Jay-Z is saying that the accuser's lawyer tried to get a financial settlement before refiling the lawsuit.
Which is a pretty loaded claim. It suggests that maybe the lawsuit is more about money than about justice.
Yeah, it plays into that whole narrative he's building about the accuser's motives being questionable.
Exactly. But remember, the plaintiff's lawyer has denied those claims.
Oh, right, they did?
They're saying they never asked for money from Jay-Z, just a confidential mediation.
So again, it's one person's word against another's.
Yep, and it reminds us that even in a legal system that's supposed to be fair and impartial, there's always that element of human judgment. And how evidence is presented, how arguments are framed, and how people perceive the people involved. All of that can have a big impact on the outcome.
So even when we're talking about something like the law, human emotions and perceptions still play a huge role.
They really do.
Yeah.
And that's what makes this case so fascinating. It's not just about the legal stuff and the facts. It's about all these bigger societal forces. Power, celebrity, public perception, the nature of truth.
Wow.
And then on top of all that, you've got the connection to those other lawsuits involving Diddy, who's like Jay-Z, a major figure in the music industry.
Right. And it's not just some random coincidence either. It speaks to how power and influence work within certain circles.
Oh, got it. They've both built empires in the music industry with wealth, fame, and connections that go way beyond music.
So it's like their personal and professional lives are all tangled up, and now those connections are being put under a microscope with these lawsuits.
And that scrutiny isn't limited to them. It also shines a light on the culture of the music industry itself, which is often glamorized for its excesses and its focus on power and success.
It's like we're getting a peek behind the curtain, seeing the underbelly of an industry that's usually all about glitz and glamour.
Exactly. And that's what makes it so interesting. It forces us to question the narratives we're given, to look beyond the surface and think about the complexities underneath.
It reminds us that even the most famous people have flaws and vulnerabilities, and that chasing fame and fortune can come at a price.
And it also makes us think about accountability. When powerful people are accused of wrongdoing, do they face the same scrutiny as everyone else? Or does their status and influence give them some kind of protection?
That's a really good question, and it's one that I think a lot of people are wrestling with as they follow this case.
It goes beyond this specific lawsuit.
Yeah.
It's about how we as a society hold powerful people accountable for their actions, and whether our systems are actually set up to handle these complex situations fairly.
That's a perfect transition to what I wanted to ask you next. We've talked a lot about the legal details, the public relations, the ethical dilemmas, but what does all this mean for us, the people watching this whole thing unfold?
That's the big question, isn't it? And it's one that each of us has to answer for ourselves. But I do think there are some key takeaways here.
I'm all ears. What are some of those takeaways?
Well, first off, I think this case is a powerful reminder that things are rarely as straightforward as they appear. There are always multiple perspectives, hidden agendas, and layers of complexity.
Everyone has a story.
Exactly. And I think it's important to approach these situations with a healthy dose of skepticism. Question the narratives that are being presented to us and try to get a more nuanced understanding.
So instead of just accepting what we see at face value, we should be asking ourselves, what's the full story? What's the context? Who benefits from this particular version of events?
You got it. And that brings us to another important takeaway, the power of critical thinking. In this day and age when we're bombarded with information from all sides, it's more important than ever to analyze information and separate fact from fiction.
Especially with high-profile cases like this one where there's so much noise and speculation, it's easy to get swept up in the hype and lose sight of the bigger picture.
Absolutely. We need to be mindful of the sources we're relying on, cross-reference information, and be wary of sensationalized headlines or biased reporting.
It's like we have to become our own media detectives, sifting through the evidence and putting together the most accurate picture we can.
Love that analogy.
Yeah.
And the more we practice that kind of critical thinking, the better we'll be at navigating the complexities of the world.
So it's not just about understanding this particular case, it's about developing a more critical and discerning lens for viewing all information.
You nailed it. And here's another takeaway that I think is really important. Recognizing that power imbalances exist everywhere, not just in the world of celebrities and music moguls.
That's so true. It's easy to get caught up in the drama of a high-profile case like this. But these same power dynamics play out in all sorts of settings, workplaces, schools, communities, even within families.
Exactly. And understanding how power dynamics work, how they can influence behavior and decision-making, that's essential for creating a more just and equitable society.
Once you start noticing those power dynamics, you see them everywhere. And it makes you more aware of how those imbalances can lead to exploitation or abuse or just plain unfairness.
Absolutely. And it challenges us to think about how we can create systems and structures that even out those imbalances and ensure that everyone has a fair shot.
Whether it's advocating for policies that protect workers' rights or supporting organizations that empower marginalized communities or just speaking up when we see injustice happening around us, we all have a role to play in creating a more equitable world.
Couldn't agree more. And I think this case, as messy and complicated as it is, gives us a good opportunity to have these important conversations, challenge our assumptions, and work towards a better future.
So it's not just about celebrity gossip or legal maneuvering. It's about using this case as a springboard for deeper reflection and meaningful action.
You got it. And that brings us to the question of how we as individuals should approach these kinds of situations. How do we engage with these complex issues in a way that's informed and thoughtful and constructive?
That's a great question to think about. And I think it's one that we can all benefit from exploring further.
I agree. And to help you with that exploration, I want to leave you with a thought-provoking exercise.
Oh, I love those. Hit me with it.
Okay, imagine you're a juror in this case. You've heard all the evidence, the arguments, the testimonies. Now you have to decide who to believe, the accuser or the accused. What would be the most important factors in your decision?
Wow, that's a heavy question. It really makes you think about what it would be like to have to make such a difficult decision with such serious consequences.
It does. And it helps you understand how complex these situations are, the gray areas where there aren't always clear answers.
It reminds us that even in our legal system, which is designed to be objective and fair, there's always that element of human judgment. And that judgment can be affected by all sorts of things, both conscious and unconscious.
So true. And that's why it's so important to be aware of our own biases, to approach these situations with humility, and to recognize that there's always more to the story than what we might initially see or hear.
Instead of rushing to judgment, we should be asking ourselves, what am I missing? What other perspectives are there? What more do I need to know before I form an opinion?
That's the essence of critical thinking. And it's a skill that we can all benefit from, not just in this case, but in every part of our lives.
So it's not about being right or wrong. It's about being open to learning and changing our minds when we get new information.
Exactly. And that's what makes these conversations so interesting. They challenge us to think critically and empathize with others and grow as people.
It's like a mental workout for our critical thinking muscles.
Totally.
Yeah.
And just like any workout, it takes effort and practice. But the more we engage with these challenging topics, the stronger our thinking becomes.
And maybe by strengthening those critical thinking muscles, we can help create a more just and equitable world.
I really believe that. And that brings me to another thought. What role do we play in shaping the conversations around these complex and sensitive issues?
That's a great question. It feels like we've talked a lot about how Jay-Z is trying to control the narrative. But what about our own power as individuals?
That's the key point. We all have a voice, even if it doesn't reach millions of people like Jay-Z's.
Our voices might not be amplified by big platforms, but they still have power to influence our own circles, our communities.
Absolutely. Every time we share an article, comment on a post, or even just talk to a friend about these topics, we're helping to shape the narrative in some way.
I never thought about it like that. It's like we're all part of this huge web of information and perspectives, and our voices, no matter how small, can create ripples that spread out.
Exactly. And those ripples can make a difference. They can challenge assumptions, inspire new ideas, and even lead to action.
So even though we might not be famous or have a ton of followers, we still have a responsibility to use our voices thoughtfully and ethically, especially with sensitive topics.
Couldn't agree more. The way we talk about these issues, the words we use, the perspectives we share, it all matters. It can shape public opinion, influence decisions, and even impact the lives of people who are directly affected.
So it's not just about expressing our own opinions, it's about being aware of how our words can affect others and trying to promote understanding and empathy and contribute to a more informed and compassionate public discussion.
Beautifully said. And it's something we should all aim for both online and offline. Whether we're debating on social media or talking to a friend, it's so important to be respectful and sensitive and willing to listen to different points of view.
Like maybe the most important thing we can do is listen more than we talk. Try to really understand where other people are coming from, even if we don't agree.
You know, that's so powerful. True understanding starts with listening, with recognizing that other people's experiences and perspectives are valid, even if they challenge our own.
So it's not about winning an argument or proving someone wrong. It's about creating a space for dialogue, empathy, and real connection, even when we disagree.
I love that. And it's so important these days when it's so easy to get stuck in echo chambers and only hear from people who agree with us.
We need to break out of those echo chambers and engage with people who challenge our thinking, who make us question our assumptions, and help us see the world in new ways.
That's the beauty of different perspectives. It broadens our understanding and makes us more well-rounded.
Totally. And it helps us avoid confirmation bias, where we only look for information that confirms what we already believe.
Confirmation bias is so sneaky. It can really mess with our view of reality. It's important to actively look for diverse viewpoints, challenge our own assumptions, and be open to changing our minds.
So it's not about being right. It's about being open to learning and growing and embracing how complex the world is.
Exactly. And that's what makes these conversations so interesting and rewarding.
Wow.
They push us to think critically and empathize with others and grow as people.
It's like every time we have a thoughtful and respectful conversation about a complicated issue, we're not just sharing information, we're expanding our understanding of the world and ourselves.
I couldn't agree more. That's the power of real human connection, sharing our stories and perspectives, even when they're messy.
So to everyone listening, we encourage you to keep those conversations going. Keep asking questions, challenging assumptions, and trying to understand the world and the people in it better.
Because through those conversations, those connections, those moments of shared humanity, we can create a more just compassionate and equitable world.
Beautifully said. So we've really gone deep on this case, looked at it from all sides, the accusations, the legal strategies, the whole societal context. And now I want to shift gears a bit, bring it back to you, the listener.
Oh, sounds good.
You know, throughout this whole discussion, there's this question that keeps popping into my head, and it's about power.
Power.
Yeah. We've talked a lot about how Jay-Z's using his platform to shape the story, to kind of control how the public sees everything. But what about us? What about our own power as individuals? What role do we play in these conversations around, these really complex and sensitive issues?
Oh, that's a fantastic question. It's easy to get caught up in the big names and big platforms, but honestly, we all have a voice.
Right.
Maybe not with the same reach as Jay-Z, but still a voice.
Our voices might not be making headlines, but they still matter, right?
They absolutely do. I mean, think about it. Every time we share an article or comment on a post or even just chat with a friend about something like this, we're shaping the conversation in some way.
Wow, I never thought of it that way. It's like we're all part of this massive web of information and opinions, and our voices, even if they seem small, can create ripples that spread out.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And those ripples can make a difference. They can make people think differently, challenge assumptions, even inspire action.
So even if we're not celebrities with millions of fans, we still got to use our voices responsibly, right? Especially when we're talking about sensitive topics like this.
100%. The words we use, the perspectives we share, all has an impact. It can shape public opinion and influence decisions and even affect the lives of people who are directly involved in these situations.
It's not just about getting our own opinions out there. It's about thinking about the impact of our words, trying to understand where others are coming from, and contributing to a more informed and compassionate public conversation.
Well said. And I think that's something we should all aim for, both online and in person. Whether we're having a heated debate on Twitter or just talking with a friend, we got to approach these topics with respect and sensitivity and a willingness to listen to different viewpoints.
Yeah, maybe the most important thing is to actually listen more than we talk, to really try and understand where other people are coming from, even if we don't agree with them.
That's so important. Real understanding starts with listening. with recognizing that other people's experiences and opinions are valid, even if they're different from ours.
So it's not about winning an argument or proving someone wrong. It's about creating a space for real dialogue and connection, even when we disagree.
I love that. Especially these days when it's so easy to get stuck in our own little bubbles online, only hearing from people who already agree with us.
Right. We got to break out of those echo chambers and talk to people who challenge us, who make us question our assumptions and help us see things from a different angle.
That's the power of diverse perspectives. It makes us more well-rounded.
Absolutely. And it helps us avoid that trap of just looking for information that confirms what we already believe.
Yeah.
Confirmation bias.
Yeah, confirmation bias is sneaky. We got to actively seek out different viewpoints, challenge our own assumptions, and be open to changing our minds.
So it's not about being right all the time. It's about being open to learning and growing and accepting that the world is complex.
Exactly. And that's what makes these conversations so valuable. They challenge us to think critically, empathize with others, and become better people.
It's like every time we have a thoughtful conversation about a tough issue, we're not just sharing facts. We're growing as individuals and expanding our understanding of the world.
Couldn't agree more. It's all about human connection, sharing our stories and perspectives, even when they're messy and imperfect.
So to all our listeners out there, we encourage you to keep these conversations going. Keep asking those tough questions, challenge those assumptions, and keep striving for a deeper understanding of the world and each other.
Because it's through those conversations, those connections, those moments of shared humanity that we can build a more just and compassionate world.
That's a great way to put it. And on that note, I think we're going to wrap up this exploration. Thank you so much for joining us on this journey, for listening with open minds and hearts.
It's been a pleasure sharing these thoughts with you. And we'll see you back here soon for our next deep dive.
Until then, stay curious, stay engaged, and keep those amazing minds of yours working.
Sound the alarm. I'm coming up. We'll have a ball. I'm sweet like a buttercup. You're a Barbie doll. Show them all what I'm made of. Strut down the hall. Won't stop till I get enough.